Hello, chat. If you are watching this, I think this might be the last time you'll get the blimp. But we are in the blimp. So, um, it's been good. Day one draft camp stuff. All the new signees, draftees coming in. Do a little workout, get to know them a little. Their parents are here, family's here, partners are here, doing a little of that. But we're winding it down right now and just walking around a little. So technically, I'm not really supposed to walk around this part too much, but I guess we could walk through our spring training and Arizona Complex front office extension. We could see our good owner, Bob Castellini's office here. But we'll walk around the patio. Oh shit, it's a little safer out there. It's also hot. It's like 95-ish. But today, to be honest, was actually really nice. It was 97, so nice. Plain graveyard, of course. Plain graveyard. Anyway, a few questions today. The first question is what if someone asked, do I prefer managing people or writing code? This is the classic, independent contributor versus leadership question. And personally, I don't necessarily think of it so binary, because a lot of the time, in order to get to a role like managing people in a department, you do have to know the inner workings of that department, be able to speak to the projects within that department, and usually that is done by doing projects in that department. So coding is always required. However, I would say there's something to be said about managerial skills, project management, time management, people management. And that's not always one-to-one with being good at projects. And in general, it's kind of difficult to expect that your best project doer is also going to be the best people manager. So overall, I think it's less of like do you like one or the other? And I think the first thing is like, if you're good at the project side, do you or have you been in a position to like show that you're also good at the management side, the people side? Because that answer is not always yes, right? I've worked with many people where their skills are so much more, their strength is definitely towards the coding as opposed to the people, and vice versa. I've worked with people where their strength should absolutely be on the people side and not the coding. I think my former boss at KFC, Jeff Long, is a great example of someone who is self-admittedly dangerous, knows just enough statistics to be dangerous, is what he says. But in terms of people management, fantastic. Clearly has put people in the path of success, including myself. And has demonstrated his ability to impact organizations by growing people's careers, both at his time in KFC and his time at Taco Bell, at least the ones that I'm most familiar with. So fantastic. And clearly, like, putting him in a situation where he's managing people is really some of the best use of his skills. So it is possible that in order to find people who are good at managing, you do need to see them do a little of the work. But once you realize they're so good at managing, it's hard to imagine them not managing. Someone who worked at the Reds, I won't use his name or anything, but he bounced around from different leadership roles within the Reds, and he was so there was so much value in the way that he approached management and the way he approached leadership and the way he was fearless and progressive about doing things. Clearly, like, his impact wasn't necessarily in any one department, but the fact that you could put him in any department and you're always going to see success was a super strong skill he had. So that's something that I've always thought of like, if I'm always going to be in a position of leadership or a position of management, I need to think less about being the best manager in the department I'm in, and I need to think in terms of career growth, how can I be the best manager wherever I'm at? And so some of those universals of like being able to level set, roadmap, career grow, these are all vague terms and kind of like bullshittery, but in my mind, these are like kind of the topic points of a manager. Being able to be someone's fiercest supporter and also strongest critic are two really big things. Knowing that your way to improve people is to show them that not only are they doing good, but their path to improvement will make them better. And I've heard of many people try to like toe the line of like being someone's ardent supporter, but someone's harshest critic in the one-on-one. I've heard this term. I've heard this before. And while I agree to some extent, the idea of like criticism and being critical about someone's work isn't because you're trying to be mean, it's because you're trying to make them better. I think that's true, but I do think that comes with some tact, right? Like, you can't just approach someone and say, hey, this is what's bad, make it better or else. That's typically an ineffective way and makes someone feel bad, right? Like, not a lot of people would react positively to that. But depending on how you build your relationship with people, you might be able to find a way to say that, and it gets strong response, and they adhere to it, and you make the person better, you make the group better by communicating what you think people need to get good at. And I think one of the biggest things that people lack when it comes to managing is being able to have the hard conversation. So being able to be critical in ways that doesn't make your employee feel like crap, because that is a really tough line to toe. So, do I I don't necessarily think I'm the best at it. And there are definitely probably many people in my organization and outside of my organization who have better tactics, irrespective of relationship, than I do. But I do feel like I'm good at it. And you don't have to believe me. You can look at the success of the people in my department or who have been a part of my department, or departments at this point. And many of them, actually, I think all of them, minus 2, have been successful. So my thought is, do I like people management over project work? In my heart, I want to say yes, but it's not like you wake up and you're like, today I want to be the boss. I think there's a little more detail there. I think for me, I'm good at it, and I should be put in a position to do the thing I'm good at. But in terms of hands-on keyboard work, I'm also good at that. And if people put me in position to do hands-on keyboard work, that will also be good. And there have been many times where I've been put in a position to do hands-on keyboard work, even as a senior director now. And the quality of the work is always very high, mainly because in my mind, I'm always the most strict when it comes to following all of the department protocols, because if I'm not the most strict about following department protocols, how can I expect the people under me to follow the protocols? So the quality is always strong. It's always good. People trust the output. But do I find that more exciting or better? I don't know. I think one piece of me says, yeah, it's exciting to, crunch time. You only have a handful of time, like your time sensitive project, pressure's on, you got to get this thing out. It's going to help lead to good decisions. That's always like a good feeling, especially when it all works out. It's hard to beat that. But in terms of people management, like that long-term feeling of like, I've put in a lot of energy into someone being the best version of themselves, and then seeing them blossom later. That's huge. It like makes you feel really good, because it's like, yeah, you had a hand in someone's development, and like you change that person, like the organization kind of stuff, the making the right decision, doing the good work, that's good. But to affect someone's career positively, it's beyond good. It's life-changing. So it's hard to weigh one versus the other, because the selfish gratification of completing projects and like getting the pat on the back, that's always good. But the selfless nature of training, theoretically, people who are better than you, I feel really good about that. So, I don't know. Gut feel says I like managing people more. And like this podcast and the streams of late are any indication, like I'm not coding a ton anymore. So it kind of makes sense that I'm leaning more towards people related things and less towards technical related things. Of course, that's not to say that my skills are any less. That code circles around most people, but I do think my skills are much more needed in a place where there's less resources to produce good people in that position. And I think that's true. I think it's difficult to, I think it is personally, I think it's difficult to train good leaders. I think you could train leaders, but are you training good leaders? Are you training, are you training someone where they're following a recipe? are you actually training chefs? And I don't know if there are many like people who truly can train a real chef. I think you could train a lot of people to follow recipes, though. Okay, next question. Someone asked about ideal structure. So someone in chat asked, the way that it's set up now, do I envision a department structure, given the fact that there's so many different department structures, what's the ideal department structure? It's a hard question because you kind of have to think, so in biology, there's this idea of structure begats function, right? Like an elbow moves so your arm can do this, your ribs develop so they could protect your organs, structure begats function. Usually don't grow things and then their function is meaningless. If so, those are what we call vestigial, things like sinuses, where sinus and sinus relief perhaps at some point in time made more sense when we needed to store more nutrients or fat or whatever, but now it's kind of like this thing fills with waste, but you have other ways to discharge waste. So you have these vestigial things, and in my mind, like when we think of organizational hierarchy in this way, structure begats function, you kind of have to think about what is the structure first. And like when I say structure, it's not the organizational structure. I'm thinking functionally, what are the operations? Like, let's just say you have a place like a service where people get reports. Okay, so you have something where people get reports. Then you have like a database. Okay, the reports get generated off of the database. Okay, in between the reports and the database, you have people ingesting new data. All right, data ingestion. All right, well, people take the data ingestion step and then they process that data to turn it into new information. Okay, so you have, let's call that feature creation. Okay. And then on top of feature creation, you have people who take those features and monitor those features in order to make sure that they maintain a quality. So on top of the data ingestion and the feature creation, you have this quality assurance layer. So you have like this pipeline now. All right, you need database people, you need data ingestion people, you need people who are creating new features based off the data that you're ingesting. You need people to monitor the quality of that data that you're creating or ingesting. And then that all gets summed up into reports that you push out. Okay. You've already identified these functions. So now, kind of on the opposite side, what's the structure? Well, the easiest way is to split all of these groups into their own departments. A database department. That may or may not include data ingestion. A analysis department, where they're creating features, but they're also monitoring the quality of those features. A reporting department, or a front end or a UI department. They're taking all this information and turning it into reports, apps, front end related work. So you have these groups. So is that the ideal structure? It's the easiest, most straightforward structure. But where are the fault points, right? Say each group takes 5 people to run, right? So now you got 15 people. Do they all report up to one person? Within each of these different groups, is there one director for each? If so, do they all have equal say? Like, what if you have to make a decision of like, we need to update this app and it requires the ingestion of this new data source. Are you ultimately reprioritizing their work? What if there were other priorities, like the people who are updating that app for the new data source, they're also trying to move their framework away from, I don't know, Angular over to some other JavaScript flavor. So is there some sort of hierarchical tiebreaker in terms of prioritization? Is it some sole person who oversees all of this, who says this is the direction, you need to pivot to these things, and then that becomes a taller structure, something like a CTO at the top, and then your technology department's under that. So let's just keep going with this. Well, if you have that structure of like someone at the top tie breaks and sets direction, directors under that person that oversee these different functions, and their structure of their department is like 5 people who support each of these things, well, congratulations, you have effectively identified the traditional format of most companies. Do I think that's ideal? I think it's idealistic, but the vast majority of organizations don't operate that way for several reasons. One, it's a lot of capital to invest. Large corporations, really, really big ones with a lot of people, they can do that. But smaller companies, you're probably asking people to wear way more hats. For example, talked about a database team with an ingestion, or a database department with an ingestion team. Okay, great. But what if that database team is also partially responsible for data quality? Okay, so now you're taking a piece of the QA checks, all right? Because you don't have 5 people to dedicate all this stuff. You might only have 3 people. What if your front end people are also your analytics people? You know, like the advent of Shiny and Streamlit. That's good enough for some people. Tableau has made development far more easy and accessible to people who know database related stuff, coding related stuff in general. Like, they don't need to know JavaScript and all this other front end stuff. They can just deploy these data dashboards. Okay, now you're leaning out your department. You're leaning out your structure. And so you reduce the size of your structure. Now you're talking about, rather than 5 different teams, you're talking maybe about 2 different teams, a database team and an analytics team. People who manage the structure of the data and the ingestion and maintain quality, and people who do the feature improvements, creating new features, and also the reporting. You've cut 60% of what was originally proposed. So is that ideal? Well, you still have the problem of hierarchy. You still have the problem of someone leads all of this and someone above that leads those groups. So my thought in terms of hierarchical decisions, you kind of have to think about what those, given everything we know, what are the most important things? So you do all these things to make the best decisions, right? Like the person who creates a model in order to project out store profitability, like that was a task that they were tasked with, but the person who asked, or the people who asked, they're nameless and faceless to this person. So the first side of it for me is like, well, if these are the projects, these are the things you have to support, what does that mean for the longevity or the growth of the people doing the work? And if you have a department that's dedicated to this one thing, but there isn't growth out of that department, or the ceiling of that department is a position that is not the CTO, but the director of that particular department, well, now it's less attractive to keep people, to promise growth, to make sure that leadership opportunities upward is actually attainable. These are things that people crave. Like it makes them want to excel at their role in order to get to that next level. So if you completely think about things in terms of what people deliver rather than what people could become, you compartmentalize and isolate people into these traditional groups, right? So a more progressive proposal is like, what would that person making these models or doing this database stuff, if they knew what the decision was at the top, what if they were more involved from the beginning? More involved with the direction of like why this decision, why this prioritization came about in the first place. Now you're taking that person at the top who sets direction and tie breaks decisions. Now you're, let's say you eliminate that role, because now rather than thinking about things in terms of like what is best for the company from the perspective of one person, maybe you're sourcing what's best for the company from the direction of many people. People who do the work, people who know how long it takes to do the work, people who understand what the impact of performance is given some of the things people request, right? Like the example of updating an app because of a new data source. Well, how much does that actually move the needle in terms of decisions? One person thinks it does, but what about the experts who actually live with that data or understand that field? What do they think? We don't know. Being in the conversation to see it all opens your eyes to not just the process, but maybe to better or different questions. So, in my opinion, rather than a tall hierarchy where the function of the organization kind of fits nicely into this hierarchical structure, I'd rather think of it like putting your best people in the best places. And sometimes it is a group where one person's going to do database work and one person's going to do development work and one person's going to help communicate that to stakeholders and ownership. But in different teams or different roles, that configuration might be different. The person doing the back-end stuff for this project might be the communicator for a different project. And if you live a little more flexible like that, you get more people to see more pieces of the operation puzzle, then you're growing everyone equally. And those who thrive in an environment where they want to wear many hats, rather than being tasked with very specific, precise work, you'll get, you will find out quickly who would rather be the people who just want to do the solo, I want to do this work, and only data engineering work. You'll find out who want to be that very quickly. And then you'll find out the people who want more responsibility, the people who want to see more of the puzzle. So why wouldn't you want to put those people in more responsibility, more leadership opportunities? Because you don't know if they're good until you actually try them out, right? So in my mind, it's a little more flat in terms of hierarchy. And the demands of the project or the demands of the organization require a flexible configuration. Like the person who leads one project might not lead the next one. So if you get used to this, if you get used to the idea of like, I'm being used in the best way possible at all times, even though that might not be always doing one thing or always doing the thing that you first started doing, then you, in terms of growth, you feel like you're getting more opportunities to show your entire skill set. So something that this kind of pours into is like, all right, well, in baseball, what would that look like? And I think something that like I might find very progressive, but I don't think will ever happen, is like you have the advent of like all of these different things: analytics, scouting, player development, strength and conditioning, sports science, nutrition, and different layers to all of them. Biomechanics, amateur versus pro scouting versus international scouting, player development at the lower levels versus the upper levels, pitching player development, hitting player development, catching player development, defensive, infield, outfield player development. You have all these different things, and they're becoming more and more specialized, but we still are working on the same problem, which is like, how do you make big leaguers and how do you win baseball games? So I would tend to think it starts with the problem, right? What are you trying to solve for? And we all know that at the very top, you're solving for wins. So that should be the GM or the president of baseball ops' main agenda. How do we put wins on the field? How do we win with big leaguers? How do we grow, develop, acquire big leaguers to put more wins on the field? But from there, I think the traditional format of, assistant GMs and into directors might not necessarily stand the test of time right now because of how many different, more specialized groups there are under that layer, under the layer of leadership. For example, you have, say, a front-end developer who only does front-end development, and they never get a chance to work on something more specific for pitching, or even like interact with the pitching coaches. Then how do we know that the person you hired doesn't want more than just being a front-end developer? And how would you ever put them in the situation to give them those opportunities? So I think it kind of starts with the baseball questions. Like if you're going to have, say, an emphasis on pitching, and you need kind of a vice president of pitching at the top who reports to the president of baseball operations, right? And then under the vice president of pitching falls all pitching initiatives. That's the coaches and the pitchers and the player development staff, the coordinators, but it's also analysts working on pitching related work. It's also front-end dev related pitching work. It's also biomechanics pitching work. It's also strength and conditioning pitching work. It's everything that eats pitching. Everything. And once that structure is formed, where now a front-end dev and an analyst and an entry-level coach are all at the same level under the department of pitching, Now you have a lot more equitability across the different roles, and the growth path is a lot more direct. Now it's not like a front-end dev becomes the full stack dev, and the full stack dev becomes the dev manager, and then the dev manager becomes the dev director, and then that somehow falls into the IT/analytics world, and then maybe you just adopt more responsibilities. You get away with, you do away with all of that. Now it's like, this person worked on pitching. This is how they work on it. When they grow, they're going to grow more pitching related work. And over time, they'll get to pick, like, are you on-field or off-field pitching? And regardless of whether on-field or off-field pitching, those all have equal chance to become the vice president of pitching. And here at the Reds, we've seen several different vice presidents of pitching, or directors of pitching rather, whether it's people who played, whether it's people who coached, whether it's front office people. We've seen it all. So, shout out to my vice president of pitching friend over at the Mets, Eric Jagers, Jags. Lots of nights working out here at the complex, and I appreciate him letting me use his office for those years where I was streaming out of spring training. So, but anyway, if you think about the baseball problem, you need pitchers, you need hitters, and then you organize under that structure, then the functions theoretically aren't different, but the structure is. So what does that mean? Well, how you grow as a person, how you grow as an employee is different. Rather than the structure before, where your growth was a little more rigid, now your growth maybe not as rigid, but a lot more linear in terms of the thing that you're specializing in. So, in specialization in this case, it's not specialization in a particular product, but it's the specialization, the problem you're solving, which is, in this case, pitching, but could be hitting, could be defense. So that's my thought. Ideal structure, in my opinion, we're not even close to what it could look like. But as I started out by saying, idealistically, there are structures that do exist, but they would require either a lot of capital or just the wholesale change in philosophy. I do think the cons for replacing your traditional GM, AGM structure with president of baseball, vice presidents of different departments in baseball makes a lot of things more muddy. You still have an issue of like, okay, well, if the vice president of pitching wants a pitcher and the vice president of hitting wants a hitter, and the president of baseball operations has to make the decision, well, one person's going to be very unhappy if you have to choose between a hitter or a pitcher, right? And so the hitting person will never see eye to eye with the pitching person unless you do a lot to make sure that they understand each other and there is some sort of give and take there, right? So compromise is really difficult when you segment based off positions, right? Whereas at the traditional GM, AGM level, it's less about, one player versus another, but best player overall. The discussions are a lot more straightforward when it comes to player assessment, as opposed to detailed or depth-wise. And then on the forefront, which should be at the forefront in both of these situations, the evaluation of cost, right? Like, If this pitcher is going to cost $35 million a year, but this hitter is going to cost $30 million a year, and you're saying they're going to put out equal, or they're projected to have equal output, that it's a better investment to go with the cheaper route, right? So in my mind, it's like, when does that come into the discussion? Because when you segment between hitters and pitchers, they really just want the best, and finances come absolutely secondary. But in some of the cases, finances do have to be primary because it's what you got to work with, you know? Again, structure begats function. So, most ideal structure? I talked about kind of this fantasy structure I'd love to see, but is it ideal? I don't know. I'll say that the structure I have currently in my department, with me at the head, and my boss being Sam Grossman, who was originally at the head, and in many ways still is. Sorry, got cut off there. But the boss at the very top, who still is, me giving him the day-to-day operations and day-to-day report of analytics. And then under me, you have R&D, which is under Chris Jackson. So he works on bringing in new metrics, taking those new metrics, putting them into the hands of coaches, making sure that that gets disseminated throughout the organization to the players. And then our projections group, which is under manager Sean Fisher, they work on taking all the features we've made. Is there year-to-year correlation? Can you project that out over many years? How stable are these metrics? How much do they provide value in terms of interaction with other metrics, ultimately adding to how many runs a player will contribute to the team, and then converting those runs into wins as ultimately the win projection, or the war projection, if you want to go to war. So in my thought of like, how close am I with this structure? Say, everyone gets their hands on everything. There's no project secrets. No one's excluded from anything. And there's a lot of overlap between the two groups. You need a person creating the metrics, and you need a person taking those metrics and projecting them out. But you still report up to an assistant GM who oversaw analytics. You know, very little do we do scouting or player development. So we do have opportunities now. They are better to get more player development and scouting reps. I say this as me being here in during draft camp, and I am a part of amateur scouting to some extent, and handing over players from amateur scouting to the player development department in order for them to begin the development of our newly acquired players, which I am also part of through my psychology and cognition department. So I do personally wear a lot of hats and have things outside of just strictly analytics, but in order for people to get to where I am, I feel like just through analytics, you do need to have like a semblance of like, what are the projects? How important are they? How long does it take to get to them? And do I have good relationships with the people doing them? And the leadership group in analytics does have that. But as we grow, as we continue to find the next backfill, the next manager, the next assistant director, the next director, I feel less and less in control. So it's hard for me to know, like, am I doing it right? Or is this all for naught? You know? And I do think I am doing it right. People have been very successful in and outside of the Reds through this format, but there's always a little self-doubt. You always got to be hypercritical, because if you're not, it's hard to know how to improve, you know? So, okay. Talked a lot. Sorry, it's a little stitched together here, chat, but yeah, didn't realize that I accidentally pressed end. So, and maybe you didn't even notice either, especially if you're listening. You probably didn't. Easter egg, find where it cut. All right, I definitely have to go now that I hear the leaf blower and lawnmower going, so. All right, chat. Doing this one. Putting this up now. There'll be another one later tonight because I don't know if I'm going to have time tomorrow to do one. So, anyway, I will catch y'all next time. Also, feel free to put questions in the replies, in the comments, in chat, and in the Discord. God, it's also really hot. I've been walking around for the last hour on this balcony. All right, 45 minutes. It's an hour. It's an hour Arizona time. Okay. See you, chat.